So welcome to week 9. I apologize that this video is coming to you a little bit later on Monday than I try to normally post these. So for this week, you will see you're continuing a lot of the work that you did last week in terms of your interview questions and transcription of that. The focus for this week is very heavily on readings. So if you've looked at your schedule, you'll see that it's a bit of a heavy week in terms of reading, but there's a reason for that. So first up on your agenda of readings this week is chapter 10 in the Saldana text. Chapter 10 talks a little bit more about the analytic process of data. He continues to talk about condensing data, theorizing based on data. And something I have seen some of you discuss and question a bit in some of the discussion board postings is also touched on in this chapter, and that is the topic of computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software. And so those are any software programs or web-based programs that allow you to use them as a method for organizing your data, your codes related to your research projects. Most, if not all of these programs do require you to pay for their services. In my experience, they often have a student rate or student discount and are not overly expensive. I have familiarity with HyperResearch and Deduce both through my own research and in working on research projects with professors while I was a doc student. From my experience working with professors, when it came time to do my own independent research, I used Deduce, which Saldana talks about in the text. I used it for a few different reasons. First of all, it's a web-based program, so you can access your data anywhere that you have internet access. You don't have to have the software downloaded to the computer that you're pulling from. So much like an email server, you just log in and your data and project is available for you to work on from anywhere that you can connect to the internet. So that was a big component of why I chose to use the ease of access. And ultimately I chose to use software because it helped me navigate some of the challenges that we've talked about when it comes to qualitative research. So first and foremost, it kept my data very organized. I found it to be a very intuitive system, and it was like an electronic filing system of my data. So I would type transcriptions of interviews, I would type up my field notes, I would load them into Deduce, and then I could title them according to my own organizational system, and I could very easily flip through my electronic files and access anything that I needed. And it actually does the same with your codes. So you still are responsible for coding your own data. It doesn't code for you. You're still doing that. But it develops a code book for you. It keeps track of the parent codes and subcodes, and I found it was a bit more organized than perhaps I would have been without it. Another reason I really liked it is because it was one more source of backup for my data. So when you're conducting your own research, your worst nightmare is losing your data sources. So your recordings, your transcripts, anything that you've coded, even write-ups of initial findings. So oftentimes you have multiple spots where you're saving your data. So I had my data in Deduce, I had it on my computer, I had it on an external hard drive, I had it on Google Drive. I know UB now has an online server, UB Box, that you can save your files to. So in order to avoid any kind of crisis of losing data because of a computer meltdown, it's one more place that your data is safely stored and backed up. Deduce also really allowed me to look at the ways in which patterns and themes were starting to emerge. So I could see which codes were occurring most frequently, which codes were co-occurring most frequently, and it allowed me to sort through my data in a really easy way. I didn't do a mixed method study, so there's a large component of the software that I never utilized. So I'm sure that this software could be leveraged even more effectively if you were looking to incorporate some kind of quantitative data. But that is not my area, so I found it to be very helpful and very effective for the qualitative piece. I know some of you have talked about maybe wanting to do mixed methods, and so that's another area in which you could potentially benefit from using some kind of data analysis software. If anyone has specific questions about my experience with Deduce or Hyper Research, I'm happy to speak with you about that. We have upcoming Skype calls that I'll talk about in a bit, so we could discuss that during our Skype conferences, or you can always reach out via email. I'm happy to talk about my work on those software programs. That brings me to another question that I've been getting frequently from all of you. As you're beginning to try to transcribe your interviews, you're finding just how time-consuming it is, and unfortunately there's no good way around this. A lot of you have asked about transcription software. Just like using data analysis software, using transcription software is a personal choice. Some researchers find it's very helpful and some do not. It's, again, not terribly expensive. I experimented a bit with Dragon Dictate software, and I think that runs anywhere from $50 to $150 for the CD, and then you download the software to your computer and you have it. So it's not terribly expensive, but some people find it a bit cumbersome to use, and that was my personal experience. So it's not any big time saver in that you can't just play your data recordings into a microphone and have the software, transcribe what it's hearing. You actually have to dictate your interviews and your observations. So you have a microphone that you're speaking into, and you are dictating everything. So spacing, line breaks, punctuation. So depending on how detailed of a transcript you're looking to get, it can be I found it to be a bit even more time consuming than just typing it out. I found it a bit frustrating because I would play a short clip of my data and then orally dictate it. Sometimes you have to correct it if the software misheard you. Sometimes then you're rewinding your clip to confirm you dictated it correctly. So you can see how it can be a bit of a challenge to use. There's certainly a learning curve with it, and the software, the more you use it, the more accurate it is because it kind of aligns to your speech patterns. For those of you that are conducting research that is not in English, which I know some of you in this class are, it's not useful. And in my own research, I was working with non-native English speakers, and so I think that was a big reason why I found it to be a bit more difficult than it was worth. But again, if you have any questions about Dragon and how that works, feel free to reach out. I do know that there are students and researchers alike that have loved it. It's a personal choice there. So it's not something that you just set up where the microphone is listening to your recording. You still are actually listening to your recordings and speaking out what you're hearing. But you aren't going through the act of typing. So something to consider. Another important component Saldana talks about in this chapter is the idea of trustworthiness and credibility, and I think this is often a concern with new qualitative researchers. They can have a misconception that perhaps qualitative research is just one researcher's idea or opinion of what's happening in a scene, and hopefully as we're moving through this coursework, you're seeing that that's absolutely not the case. Although we adhere to a different set of procedures than quantitative research, it's just as rigorous. So there's a brief piece in chapter 10 where Saldana talks about this, but if it's something that you are interested in reading more about, I would reference you to the text Saldana draws on in this piece. and that's the Lincoln and Guba 1985 text. They have a chapter on establishing trustworthiness that could be helpful if you're still trying to work out how exactly we address that in qualitative research. The remaining readings for this week are setting you up for your upcoming assignments. So we have assignment F. It's not due for 2 weeks, but it's quite a substantial assignment. You are beginning to prepare for it in completing your interviews and transcribing your interviews, but it's a bit of a hefty project there, assignment F. So I would really strongly encourage you to begin looking over the details of that assignment and reaching out with questions you have, maybe starting to draft up some of your initial work on it, just so you're taking steps to get some headway on that one, so you're not trying to crunch too much into the week that it's due. So you have an example dissertation study, Maine 2017. You're not expected to comprehensively read that at all. Just kind of look it over, paying special attention to the connection between the methodology that was employed there, the data, and then the findings that the author put forth. And you also have an example research proposal. So these are to try to illustrate what your final research projects would look like, not for this class as we're doing a video proposal, but further down the line, perhaps when you're completing your research component or your actual dissertation. Unrelated to the readings for this week, I would also really encourage you to reach out to your advisors and ask if they have any exemplary dissertation studies completed by students that they advised, so that you can look at examples that your advisors directly oversaw and thought of as being high quality research. I know I did that myself. I got a few different example dissertations from individuals who worked with my advisor, so I could see the kinds of research that she oversaw and the expectation of the quality of work that I would be putting forth. So that's separate, but as you move forward in your program, it's important to be aware of your expectations as a developing researcher, outside the confines of this class. The last two readings for this week are another chapter from the Lecomte text and the Lincoln and Guba text that I referenced earlier, both on the analytic process for qualitative data. So like I mentioned last week in my video, I know there's a lot of fear around coding. So hopefully these resources will continue to clarify that process for you, and you will be able to better understand what that analytic process actually looks like. I know many of you have mentioned in the discussion boards frustration with the ways in which the methods section is handled in a lot of published research. And so it's difficult to truly understand what's happening behind the scenes in terms of analysis. And these readings are a way to kind of speak to that. So hopefully that will continue to clarify any questions that you may have. Okay, so I mentioned your assignment this week. You have discussion board postings, all of those readings that I just spoke about. And then the big piece is your second interview and continue transcription. So continue to work on your research project. And looking ahead for next week, we have another round of Skype calls coming up. If you can believe it or not, it's already time for us to chat again. So I have developed another doodle poll, another doodle scheduling email to send out to you. I know everyone is very busy, and I know that this class is very intensive in terms of the workload. So I have opened up some hours on the weekend. I know it's not ideal for those of you with families, but some of you are abroad, and so trying to work with time zones and work schedules, I'm hoping maybe with a little bit more availability during the weekend that we might be able to connect a little bit more quickly than that first time around. The Skype calls are going to specifically be about analysis, the analysis that you've completed thus far, and ideas for your research proposal assignment. And that's your final assignment in this class. So I would really encourage you, as I mentioned before we Skype, familiarize yourself with assignment F, familiarize yourself with the research proposal assignment, and that way if you have questions or concerns about expectations for those assignments, what the end project would look like, we can discuss those one-on-one during our Skype conversations. The only other really outstanding big piece to the class we have is your research article critique. So I would add in, if you have questions about that, we can address those during the Skype conferences as well. Just like we did last time, I'm going to ask that you draft 2 to 3 questions to kind of focus our time together. But other than that, this week, like I mentioned, is a bit of a heavy reading week, but I know you're all up to the challenge, and continue to work a bit on your project. So, really try to complete that second interview and continue to chip away at the transcription of both the first and second interview piece. As always, if you have any questions or concerns about what you have completed or what will be coming up in the class, please do not hesitate to reach out. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you all again and seeing what has come about after you've completed your first set of interviews. So I hope you have a very productive week, and if you need anything, please shoot me an email.